Have you ever heard a sound that shouldn't exist? Well, I also thought it was just a joke until that night at the church. I started to hear an old piano playing by itself in the attic, in a place where no one else should be. I thought I was going crazy, but when I decided to investigate, what I found made me wish I had never gone up those stairs. If you think this is scary, just wait until you hear what happened next. The clock struck 7 p.m. as I entered the church for my night shift. The cold air and the sepulchral silence welcomed me like old acquaintances, shrouded in a mantle of darkness that seemed to weigh on my shoulders. I had been working as a night janitor for a few months, and the solitary routine no longer bothered me as much. Or at least that's what I thought. The night hid secrets that I was yet to discover. The church's imposing and ancient stone walls seemed to breathe with me as I walked down the central aisle, my footsteps echoing in a nearly supernatural way in the emptiness that surrounded me. The old fluorescent lights, scattered in strategic points, cast a yellowish glow that barely penetrated the deep shadows. The empty, dark, polished wooden benches watched my passage, like silent witnesses, guardians of long-forgotten stories. I started cleaning methodically, as I always did. It was a sort of ritual, an attempt to bring some order to a place where time seemed to have stopped. The smell of wax and old wood filled my nostrils as I wiped the polished surfaces, each of my movements accompanied by the rhythmic sound of the friction of the cloth against the altar. The statues, sculpted with serene and pious expressions, cast distorted and menacing shadows on the walls, distorting their sacred forms into something almost profane under the flickering light. As I progressed in my tasks, my mind began to wander. I thought about the scary stories that the other night shift workers sometimes shared, stories that always seemed darker and more disturbing in the echo of the empty corridors. I recalled a custodian who once mentioned seeing a figure pass by the sacristy in a glimpse, or another who swore he had heard children's laughter coming from the empty confessional. Nervous laughter always accompanied these tales, as if no one wanted to admit how much those narratives affected us. I, particularly, had never experienced anything extraordinary until that night. The church's attic had always intrigued me. It was a place shrouded in mystery, with an air of abandonment that contrasted with the rest of the building. Up there, hidden from everyone's sight, rested an old piano, covered in a thin layer of dust, and surrounded by old furniture and objects that seemed to have been forgotten by time. I never understood why they kept it there, as it seemed broken and condemned to oblivion. Maybe it was just another relic of the past, destined to gather dust away from the eyes of the faithful. Or maybe, just like the church's darkest secrets, it was hidden in plain sight but kept from being found. As I was cleaning the altar, an unexpected sound broke the silence. Soft piano notes floated in the air, coming from the upper floor, shattering the calm and making me stop immediately. My heart raced, pounding in my temples, but I tried to calm myself. It must be someone playing a prank on me, I thought, trying to push away the fear that was starting to settle like a shadow within me. However, there was something different about that music, something that played with my nerves in a way I couldn't explain. With hesitant steps, I decided to investigate. I took a deep breath, gathering courage to climb the stairs that led to the attic. Each step creaked under my feet, as if protesting my intrusion. The melody continued, soft and melancholy, like a lament of lost souls, increasing my anxiety with each step. True horror stories began to invade my mind, but I tried to push them away, convincing myself that it was all just a prank or a disturbing coincidence. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The attic door was ajar, a strip of darkness inviting me in. The air up there was different, denser, as if carrying centuries of secrets never revealed. I swallowed hard and pushed the door, which opened with an ominous creak, a sound that seemed to echo inside me, striking a note of deep discomfort. The music abruptly stopped, leaving only an oppressive silence, a void that weighed on my ears as if the whole world had held its breath. My eyes scanned the room, adjusting to the dim light. The attic was exactly as I remembered, dusty, filled with objects covered in sheets. And in the center, the old piano, its opaque surface reflecting the light that barely made its way through the dirty windows. There was no sign of life, no indication that anyone had been there playing moments ago. A chill ran down my spine as I contemplated the silent instrument, which now seemed a sinister presence in that time-forgotten place. I cautiously approached the piano, each step a decision between facing the unknown or succumbing to fear. The wooden floor creaked under my weight, as if the church itself protested my audacity. I touched the keys lightly, but no sound came out. As I suspected, the instrument was indeed broken, its out of tune and dusty strings incapable of producing any harmonic sound. Then, how could I explain the music I had heard? The terror of the night shift began to become a palpable reality, as if I were being sucked into one of the stories my colleagues told. A story in which I was the protagonist. As I turned to leave, eager to leave that unsettling place, a deafening crash came from behind me. I jumped, my heart almost stopping. The sound came from a large metal cabinet leaning against the wall. One of those old cabinets used to store valuables or important documents. I froze, unable to move, as my mind screamed for me to run away, to leave everything behind, and never look back. The crash of the metal cabinet still reverberated in my ears when I finally managed to move. My body trembled, torn between the instinct to flee and a morbid curiosity, that inexplicable attraction that fear provokes, pushing us towards the unknown even when we know that the best course of action would be to retreat. The truly scary nighttime stories I had heard now seemed like an omen of what I was about to face. With faltering steps, I approached the cabinet. Its cold surface reflected the little light that came through the dusty windows of the attic. I extended my trembling hand towards the handle. The cold metal against my skin made me hesitate. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, fighting the feeling that something terrible was lurking, waiting for me to make a mistake. In a burst of courage, or perhaps madness, I turned the handle. The door opened with a prolonged creak, revealing nothing. The inside of the cabinet was empty, except for a few dusty shelves. I sighed in relief, almost laughing at my own paranoia. But then, I noticed something strange. At the back of the cabinet, there were marks in the dust. They looked like fingers, as if someone or something had dragged itself out. My blood ran cold. The truly frightening experiences the other employees reported always had this element of inexplicability, this feeling that something was wrong, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. And now, I was in the middle of one of those stories, living that nightmare. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the mysterious marks, my mind trying to process what my senses were telling me. And then, I heard it, a whisper, so soft that I almost thought it was my imagination. But it was there, coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, a voice without a body, murmuring words I couldn't comprehend, but that carried an implicit threat. Something primordial that awakened a deep fear within me. The paranormal night shift I had so feared was becoming a reality before my eyes. The whisper gradually grew louder, turning into a cacophony of indistinguishable voices, each one seeming to whisper directly into my ear. Even though the room remained empty, my entire body trembled, dominated by a primal fear. A fear that seemed to arise from the depths of my being, instinctive and uncontrollable. The truly scary work stories I'd heard from my colleagues now seemed like a mere prelude to the horror I was experiencing. Without thinking twice, I turned and ran towards the attic door. My feet barely touched the ground as I rushed down the stairs, stumbling and almost falling several times, desperation driving my movements. The voices seemed to pursue me, echoing through the empty corridors of the church, as if they were alive, as if they were entities that fed on my terror. The piano started playing again, a frenzied and dissonant melody that blended with the chorus of whispers, creating a symphony of madness that threatened to shatter my sanity. I reached the ground floor of the church, breathless and disoriented. The benches and statues seemed to contort in the shadows, coming to life, moving imperceptibly but noticeably enough for me to know that I wasn't safe there. Unexplained night incidents like this were the nightmare of any night shift worker, and I was living one at that moment. Every shadow, every dark corner seemed to hide something that watched me, something that was just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I ran towards the main door, my only thought being to escape that place, to flee before the worst happened. When I reached the exit, I glanced back, a mixture of fear and curiosity. What I saw will be forever etched in my memory, a shadowy figure at the top of the stairs, undefined and menacing, watching my escape with eyes I couldn't see but whose presence I could feel. I didn't wait to see more. Fear took over, and I burst through the door, the cold night air hitting me like a slap, a brutal reminder that I was alive. I ran down the deserted street, not looking back, until I reached home, each step a battle against the urge to glance over my shoulder, to check if I was being followed. I locked all the doors and windows, shaking uncontrollably, every sound a possible sign that something had followed me. That night I vowed never to return to that church, especially during the night shift. The truly scary experiences I had in that place convinced me that there are things in this world that defy rational explanation. The terror of the night shift became too real for me, and ever since, I avoid working after sunset. Some doors once opened cannot be closed, and some mysteries are best left unsolved. I've always been the type of person who prefers the tranquility of the night. Maybe that's why I accepted the night janitor job at Primavera Municipal School. My routine was simple. Start at 10 p.m., clean the classrooms, hallways, and bathrooms, and leave at 6 a.m. No big deal, right? Well, that's what I thought until that night. The school was an old building, constructed in the 50s, with long U-shaped wings. The exposed brick walls silently told stories of generations of students who had passed through its halls. During the day, the place bustled with the energy of hundreds of children. But at night, it was a completely different world. On that particular night, I started my routine as usual. Broom in hand, I walked down the hallways, removing the remnants of the busy day. The silence was broken only by the sound of my footsteps and the occasional creak of a door. As I progressed through the wing, I turned off the lights behind me, creating a moving border between light and darkness. I was almost done cleaning the wing when I noticed something strange. One of the lockers at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it earlier. Must have been the wind, I thought, trying to convince myself, but something in the back of my mind told me there was no breeze on that hot summer night. As I approached to close the locker, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the air around me had become heavier, denser. I shook my head, trying to shake off the feeling. It's just scary night shift stories, I muttered to myself, closing the locker with a determined click. Little did I know that this night would bring truly scary experiences, becoming one of the true horror stories I would never forget. I continued my nightly rounds, trying to ignore the uneasiness growing inside me. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows dancing on the walls as I advanced. It was just another night on my paranormal night shift. Though I didn't know it yet, I reached the end of the U-shaped wing, where the doors to the rest of the school were located. My hand trembled slightly as I turned the key in the lock, the metallic sound echoing in the sepulchral silence. It was then that I heard something that made my heart leap, a distant, muffled child's laughter. I froze, my eyes frantically scanning the dark corridor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling, breaking the silence. No answer, just the low hum of the fluorescent lights above. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, fueled by all those scary work stories my colleagues always told. I decided to continue my work, forcing myself to focus on the routine tasks. I cleaned the last classrooms, my movements mechanical and hurried. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me, as if invisible eyes followed me everywhere. "It's just really scary nighttime stories messing with my head," I muttered to myself. A mantra to ward off fear. I was about to turn off the lights in the last hallway when it happened. A sudden movement in the corner of my eye made me turn abruptly. For a moment I swore I saw the dark silhouette of a child running back and forth in the corridor. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my system. It couldn't be real. I had locked all the doors, checked every room. I was alone in the building. Or at least I should have been. Panic took over. My breathing became rapid, and I could feel cold sweat trickling down my forehead. This was the kind of night shift terror I had always feared but never believed I would actually experience. With trembling hands, I grabbed my cell phone, ready to call for help, but hesitated. What would I say? That I saw a ghost child in an empty school. Gathering all my courage, I decided to investigate. I slowly walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Every shadow seemed to move. Every noise made my heart jump. I reached the spot where I thought I saw the figure, but there was nothing but emptiness and darkness. That's when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. It seemed to come from one of the classrooms. I cautiously approached, my hand hesitating on the doorknob. With a quick movement, I opened the door. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint light coming from the hallway. And there, in the back of the room, I saw something that froze my blood. A small figure was crouched in the corner, its back to me. It didn't move. It made no sound. My mind screamed for me to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Slowly, very slowly, the figure began to turn. I wanted to close my eyes, wanted to run, but I was paralyzed. When the figure finally turned completely, I found myself face to face with what appeared to be a child. But before I could process what I was seeing, a sinister smile spread across its face, an expression that didn't belong on any normal child. In the blink of an eye, the figure rushed towards me, passing by like a cold gust of wind. I stood in shock, unable to move, as I heard multiple laughs echoing down the hallway, intensifying and multiplying. It was as if dozens of children were laughing at the same time, the sound coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I stood paralyzed, my body shaking uncontrollably, not knowing what to do in the face of these inexplicable night incidents. The laughs continued to echo through the corridors, a cacophony of childish voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. My body finally reacted, propelled by pure survival instinct. I started running, my feet pounding against the linoleum floor, the sound mixing with the ghostly laughs. My mind went blank, dominated by terror. I couldn't think, couldn't reason. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there as fast as I could. The scary stories at work that once seemed so distant now became my reality on this paranormal night shift. I turned a corner and almost slipped, my shoes sliding on the freshly waxed floor. The laughs seemed to be getting louder, closer. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see a horde of ghostly children chasing me. But the corridor behind me was empty. Still, I could feel a presence, as if something was approaching, about to reach me. Finally, I spotted the exit doors. My hands were trembling so much that I could barely fit the key into the lock. "Come on, come on," I muttered desperately, turning the key. The click of the lock was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I pushed the door open with all my might and rushed out into the cool night air. The contrast between the silence of the night and the chaos inside the school was shocking. The laughs abruptly stopped as I crossed the threshold. I ran to my car, got in, and locked the doors, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I looked at the school, now silent and seemingly normal, but I knew I would never see that place the same way again. I started the car with still shaking hands and drove out of the parking lot as fast as I could. As I drove home, I tried to process what had happened. They were truly scary experiences I had lived through. The kind of thing you read about in true horror stories, but never expect to experience yourself. The next day, I handed in my resignation letter. No amount of money would be worth going back to that place. The really scary nighttime stories I used to hear with skepticism now had a new meaning for me. I had survived my own night shift horror story, and I was determined for it to be the last. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that school. Maybe some things are better left in the shadows, unexplained. But one thing is certain. I never underestimated the power of the unknown again, especially when night falls and the shadows come to life. The clock struck 10:40 p.m. as I entered the college building. The campus, usually bustling during the day, was now enveloped in a sepulchral silence. I was the only technician on the night shift, responsible for keeping the systems running and troubleshooting any issues that arose in the classrooms. I walked down the empty hallways, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The air was heavy with an inexplicable tension, as if the building itself held secrets that only revealed themselves after dark. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. After all, they were just night shift horror stories that colleagues like to tell to scare the newcomers. I checked my task list and saw that I needed to install software in a room I had never visited before. It was a simple task, something I could do with my eyes closed. Little did I know that this night would become one of the truly scary experiences of my life. As I approached the designated room, I noticed something strange. The hallway seemed darker than usual, the shadows denser. I shook my head, dismissing these thoughts. They were just tricks my tired mind was playing on me. After all, inexplicable night incidents didn't happen in real life, right? With a determined sigh, I turned the doorknob and stepped into the room. Darkness enveloped me like a cloak, but I didn't bother to turn on the lights. I was used to working in the dark, and my eyes would soon adjust. I confidently made my way towards the instructor's computer, ready to begin my work, and that's when everything changed. Suddenly, I froze in the middle of the room. A chill ran down my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I felt watched. No, surrounded. It was as if dozens of eyes were fixed on me, piercing the darkness. My heart raced, pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in the stillness of the room. Slowly, ever so slowly, my eyes began to adjust to the dim light, and that's when I saw them, all around the room, emerging from the walls like a macabre vision, were hospital beds, and on each bed sat a motionless figure, their eyes fixed on me. "Oh, I'm sorry," I instinctively shouted, my voice trembling with fear. I took a step back, ready to flee this nightmare scenario. But then, in a flash of lucidity, reality imposed itself. They weren't real people, but plastic dummies. I was in a nursing classroom. The relief I felt was momentary, even knowing they were just mannequins. I couldn't shake off the oppressive feeling that permeated the room. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, and the empty eyes of the dummies continued to follow me. It was as if in some way they were aware of my presence. I forced myself to take a deep breath and focus on the task at hand. "They're just dummies," I muttered to myself, trying to calm my nerves. But as I approached the instructor's computer, I couldn't help but notice how the silence seemed to thicken, as if the very night was holding its breath. That promise of just another paranormal night shift was turning into one of the true horror stories I tried so hard to avoid. I sat down at the computer, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed. The monitor illuminated my face with an eerie glow, casting distorted shadows across the room. I tried to focus on the software installation, but my eyes kept drifting to the dummies around me. Suddenly, an almost imperceptible sound made me freeze. It was like a whisper, so faint it could have been the wind blowing through the window cracks, but there was no breeze on that hot night. The whisper grew, turning into an unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from all sides at once. My heart raced again. I spun around abruptly, half expecting to see the dummies moving, coming to life, but they remained still, their glassy eyes reflecting the bluish light of the monitor. However, something had changed. The shadows seemed denser, almost tangible, as if they were slowly creeping closer. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. After all, scary work stories were common among night shift workers, but they never amounted to more than tales to scare the newcomers. I refused to believe I was living one of them. I forced myself to get back to work, typing furiously to finish the installation as quickly as possible. The murmurs continued to rise and fall like waves, sometimes seeming to form words I almost understood. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I could swear that, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the dummies moving, their plastic faces contorting into impossible expressions. With trembling hands, I finally completed the software installation. A sigh of relief escaped my lips, but it was quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. I was about to get up when I noticed something strange on the monitor. My reflection was not alone. Behind me, where there should have been only an empty wall, a shadowy figure was materializing. Tall, slender, and with no distinct face, it seemed to be made of the very shadows that danced across the room. My body froze, unable to move as I watched. Horrified, the creature approached. The whispers, once almost inaudible, now echoed through the room with chilling clarity. "Join us," they said. "Become part of the eternal silence." In a burst of adrenaline, I spun the chair, ready to face whatever that thing was, but the room was empty, except for the dummies. However, something was terribly wrong. The mannequins, once motionless, were now standing around my chair, their empty eyes fixed on me, their articulated mouths open in silent screams. In a leap, I jumped to my feet and ran for the door, my heart threatening to burst out of my throat, but the doorknob wouldn't turn, as if it had been welded shut. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the shadows that were now moving like living creatures on the walls. That's when I felt something cold touch my shoulder. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned. The dummies had moved closer, their limbs twisting in unnatural ways, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings, and behind them, the shadowy figure loomed, its arms reaching out like tentacles of darkness. In a final act of desperation, I closed my eyes and threw myself against the door with all my might. To my surprise, it opened, and I fell into the illuminated hallway. I quickly got to my feet, looking back at the room. Everything was normal. The dummies in their beds, the shadows still. No sign of the shadowy figure, but I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. I ran down the hallways, out of the building, and didn't stop until I reached my car, breathless and trembling. That night I learned that some night shift horror stories are not just stories, and that sometimes the campus silence hides secrets that are best left in the shadows. I handed in my resignation the next morning. Some may say it was just my imagination, stress, or fatigue, but I know the truth. And every time I pass by the campus at night, I can't help but wonder, who will be the next to discover what lurks in the shadows of silence? If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.